Even the biggest Angel of Darkness fans, of which I am among them, will not deny that this game is flawed to hell and back. The Angel of Darkness story is an extremely complex, layered web of lore galore, sometimes too much for its own good. I think the writer, Murty Schofield, the creative genius that he is, may have been a touch too enthusiastic to throw every idea that he had at core design, because they would have, understandably, keenly wanted to include everything Murty came up with, which probably hindered the development process. Sometimes, just sometimes, less is more. Had Angel of Darkness been fully realised the way core design designed, I actually think it would have deviated a little bit too far from its roots, although not nearly as much as what came after. But regardless, I'll be retuning some aspects of it so the gameplay might be more well-rounded, so here I'll present the changes I would have made in a hypothetical remake. As in the current game, a French news reporter would narrate about a series of monstrum killings. He'd mentioned that a white woman with a braid in double denim has been sighted fleeing Werner's murder site, but doesn't mention Lara's name. There's no need for the police to know it's Lara, as such a plotline would go nowhere and wouldn't be needed. The cinematic would fade to black when Lara looks into the mirror to 2 nights earlier and Paris, France. The conversation with Werner would mostly be the same, except Lara would be less hostile to him, because we all know Werner did try to save her, and it's fair to assume they would have had that conversation. Lara would still be wary towards him, and Werner would explain about how he's been hired to track Obscura paintings by a psychopath called Eckhart, and that he's being stalked while monstrum killings are going on in Paris. Werner would give Lara Carvier's address on a scrap of paper, which mentions she's a historian and academic at the Louvre Department of Medieval and Renaissance Studies. The invasion and chase would begin as we know it, except Lara would have had no backpack at all during this time. Instead of 2 Rottweilers knocking Lara out of a window, when she reaches the window at the end of the corridor, she'd put her foot on the windowsill and launch through the glass over a small courtyard onto a window frame from a building opposite and climb up onto the roof. This is where gameplay would first begin, so level 1 would actually be an expanded version of industrial rooftops. This is because I don't think an enclosed alley with balconies and ladders is a particularly great place to start. Neither is that inaccessible alternative alleyway that fans romanticize so much. You'd get familiar with her moves and controls while moving from rooftop to rooftop and in and out of disused interiors. It's a much more open space with more potential than a dingy back alley. At a certain point, the police helicopter would catch up to you, you'd go to street level and then break into a derelict Le Serpent Rouge to hide. Yes, Le Serpent Rouge would be brought in earlier than the current game. There'd be no combat, but the lighting rig puzzle would remain, but be repurposed as a means of creating a path from one end of the top floor to the other, where the exit is, as the walkways would be fallen away. Back outside on the roofs, you do a bit more hopping and evading until the end of level cinematic as we know it would begin. The conversation with Carvier would be as we know it, still with both of them apprehensive of each other. The conversations would be fully non-interactive. This is because if you're going to have dialogue trees, then you should go all out like a point-and-click adventure game might handle it. And I don't think that's entirely appropriate for Tomb Raider, so I'd rather keep it simple and just keep the line between cinematics and gameplay firmly drawn. Lara would maintain her innocence with more conviction than the current game because she doesn't sound very reassuring as it stands. Therefore, I'd lean more into Lara protesting her innocence. Carvier would tell Lara that Werner was commissioned 5 weeks ago to find a couple of Obscura paintings by a client named Eckhart. They'd be 3 14th century artworks thought to be linked to alchemy and dark arts. I changed it from 5 to 3 paintings so it's easier to track in your head what the entire collection is and the status of each of them at any given time. Hostility would build as Carvier would show her paranoia about Lara's possible involvement with Werner's death in light of the monstrum killings. Carvier would hesitantly hand Lara a sealed letter, not a notebook, addressed to Lara, which Carvier was to give to her if anything happened to Werner. I changed it to a letter instead of a notebook because honestly, field notebooks being referred to on the adventure are quite overused at this point, and I prefer a briefer launch point to go off of, with Lara attaining all future knowledge herself instead of the notebook feeding it to her. At any rate, Carvier would then inform Lara she'd better go because she's gonna call the police, just as she locks herself in another room, and that her warning is out of respect for Werner's memory. Lara would respond sarcastically with,
"You're all heart,"
before departing out the window. Lara would stick to the shadows as she narrowly avoids a police car and finds shelter from the rain in a street door alcove, with police sirens becoming more and more distant in the background. She'd open and read the letter there because it's as good a place as any. It would disclose a few points. The first point is that Louis Bouchard is an underground Parisian gang boss, with his address of Le Mur translated from the wall, and the door guard password of Pluie Noire, translated from Black Rain. It said Bouchard was arranging him gear, weapons, maps and information on the Louvre for Lara to collect. The second point is that Werner was going to access the storm tunnels because there's an archaeological dig at the Louvre to find the Obscura paintings he was commissioned to get. He wanted to circumvent acquiring the painting through proper channels, Carvier and the Louvre, so he could pass it to his client, Eckhart, quicker because he was so fearful of his life. Ultimately though, it was too dangerous for him and he decided to ask Lara to do it. The third point is that one of the three paintings was to be beneath the Louvre. Matthias Vasily, a highly suspect art and antiquities dealer in Prague, recovered and sent him an encrypted map to the location of this Louvre painting, which Werner decrypted. And the last point is the letter containing some strange symbols. Lara, puzzled, would say to herself under her breath, "What were you involved in, Werner?" Lara's motivation to pursue this is a mixture of being intrigued as to the paintings in their own right, wanting to fulfill Werner's request, and wanting to know how this could lead to Werner's killer. The next morning, Lara would head to Bouchard's address to collect the gear. She'd approach a church with the banner Le Mur. As Lara enters, she'd see Curtis leaning against a wall nearby, smoking. They'd both make brief eye contact. Lara would state to the doorman that she's looking for Louis Bouchard and give the password. She'd be escorted past the main gym, which is occupied by various people, and down to the lower level of the church into Bouchard's office. On the way there, through the sick room, she'd catch a glimpse of Arnold, who is physically and biologically corrupted. In this seedy office room of Bouchard's would be a couple of other, unnamed, lower-ranking gangsters. Lara and Bouchard would talk. He'd back up what was in Werner's letter to Lara with more information, which is that Werner was to go through the storm tunnels by using dynamite to access the medieval foundations of the Louvre to access it. Bouchard would hand her the gear because Werner had told Bouchard it would be Lara collecting it. The supplies would include a knockout chemical aerosol, Louvre storm drain maps and the dynamite. Everyone would then stop to pay attention to the radio nearby as the news reporter says the monstrum has been active last night and taken 2 victims, Werner and Carvier, and that a white woman with a braid in double denim has been sighted fleeing Werner's murder site. This would be the same voice from the prologue. Bouchard would just flippantly say he doesn't need to know, but that's just lucky Werner paid in advance. Level 2 would be Louvre storm drains. So yes, I cut the daytime Parisian ghetto section because I think running around daytime urban streets, talking to people, doing favors just isn't appropriate or engaging for a Tomb Raider game. Even had the section been materialized to full fruition as core design intended, call it a hunch, but I have the oddest feeling it just wouldn't have been received well. I'm glad I found a way to incorporate Le Serpent Rouge because that was a good bit of gameplay that could be retained, but I think ultimately having level 1 be a relatively action-oriented introductory level on industrial rooftops that ends with Lara learning more context from Carvier, then Bouchard, and then level 2 being Louvre storm drains just flows so much more nicely than having that awful, awkward slog through Parisian ghetto. I've always thought this way, even before Paititi got complaints about being a social hub and slowing the pace down. Unfortunately, it means Janice the friendly prostitute gets cut, but it is a necessary evil for the sake of the bigger picture as a whole. I know I'm cutting a lot, but I will be adding in a lot too. At any rate, the start of level 2 would now have Lara with her twin pistols, a new backpack, and she'd wear the camouflage trousers and black vest. The level would play out as we know it, but expanded slightly, without the use of any strength upgrades though, or any upgrades throughout the entire game, because let's be real, they were just weird and stupid in Angel of Darkness. At the end of the level, once you'd place and ignite the dynamite in the final area, there'd be an explosion and a fire chase sequence back through the tunnels that would result in a cinematic where the flames fully engulf Lara just as she dives out of the tunnel into the previous area she was in to get underwater and out of the way of the fire. Because the inflamed swan dive from Ren's pawn shop got cut, I thought I could retain the spectacle of this scene by placing it in Louvre storm drains instead, which was possibly the original plan from this early trailer anyway. You'd then return to where you implanted the dynamite and finally get into the Louvre. A cinematic would show the Cabal in unknown location in Paris having a meeting. Eckart, Gunderson, Muller, Boaz and Carell would talk about their plans. Eckart would basically establish 3 points. The first is that they already possess one of the 3 Obscura paintings. Eckart would say that Werner established the second one is underneath the Louvre and order Gunderson, a hired leader of a mercenary group, to infiltrate the Louvre and retrieve painting number 2. The second point is that they would all re-establish at their base in Prague after they have Obscura painting 2, because they're close to closing in on the 3rd painting in Prague through a contact called Matthias Vasily. The third point is that when they have the 2nd and 3rd paintings, they'll be able to take the 3 metallic symbols of power embedded into them to combine them into the Sanglyph and use it to reawaken the sleeper. Eckart would comment to Boaz, "Hopefully, it will be more successful than your failed prototype Nephilim." Level 3 would be Louvre Galleries. Lara would have to stealthily avoid guards. Killing them would result in alarms going off and Lara's capture. This is because she shouldn't exactly be murdering innocent security guards anyway. You are to stealthily find the security room that has an electronic map of the floor and knock out the security guard, keeping an eye on it with the chemical aerosol Bouchard gave you. Here, as a puzzle, you'd have to unlock a series of doors to create a path of rooms that are only protected by lasers rather than protected by guards. Lara needs to get to Carvier's office as marked on the system's map in order to learn more of the archaeological dig operation and find out what Carvier found out about the Obscura paintings in general. All routes would be marked as having either guards or lasers. You'd formulate a path forwards by locking and unlocking the right sequence of doors to trap the Roman guards whose walking pathways would be marked, only leaving a path that's solely occupied by lasers. Once done, Lara would disable their radio servers so they can't call for help. Just before reaching her office are some X-ray machines Lara comments along the way. In Carvier's office, you'd find 3 things. First one being information on how the Obscura paintings have a metallic symbol of power built into them that, once combined, becomes something called the Sanglyph, an artifact of great alchemic power, which Eckart created back in the 13 or 1400s, but that the Lux Veritatis seized the Sanglyph. It would say the Lux Veritatis ordered Brother Obscura to split the Sanglyph into 3 pieces, embed them within paintings of religious imagery and scatter them across Europe, which is how they became known as the Obscura paintings. It would explain that this was to suppress the artifact's evil power, but that Brother Obscura secretly made encrypted maps showing where he hid them. Lara would recall that Werner's letter to her said a man named Matthias Vasily sent Werner one of those maps. Lara would comment that Eckart must want the paintings for the metallic symbols of power and wonder who the Lux Veritatis were exactly. The player knows from the earlier cinematic that Eckart wants to ultimately reignite the sleeper, but Lara doesn't know that last bit yet. The second bit of information is that the Nephilim race is a hybrid offspring of angels and humans, thought to be able to shapeshift. It says they flourished in early biblical times in Turkey, now extinct.
Well, you can't win them all.
Lastly, you find Carvier's security pass to unlock the door to the archaeological dig. You'd eventually find the dig site where those strange symbols of Werner's suddenly become helpful in unlocking the way to Level 4, Tomb of the Ancients. It would open with a cinematic showing Lara sliding down the chute, and upon seeing the large cylindrical complex, she'd say under her breath with a smirk, "This is where I start to have fun," and then roll up her camo trousers into short shorts. This level would be greatly expanded on and be pure classic Tomb Raider territory, including all sorts of side areas such as the ones found in beta footage. The path between Tomb of the Ancients and the Hall of Seasons would be underwater and lead you to solve Neptune's Hall, where once you've picked up the water crystal, the ceiling opens to reveal the Hall of Seasons, housing the off-shooting trap rooms for the fire, earth and air crystals. This would make the level design slightly more interesting than a generic hub room, I think. When it comes to the Wrath of the Beast room for the Earth Crystal, however, there would be no giant demon statue, and the room would already be destroyed and precariously unstable upon entry, presenting a platforming challenge. Once you'd eventually find the painting room at the end of the level, it would be a big chamber with a huge demon statue. Upon reading the inscription, Brother Obscura's spirit would awaken and move to the statue and possess it, making it a boss fight. Once the undead statue is crumbled from your gunfire, you'd be able to retrieve the painting and take a newly formed shortcut back to the Tomb of the Ancients cylindrical complex. A cinematic would show Lara beginning to manually crawl back up the chute to the Louvre, and we'd see Nephilim Corel, half engulfed in shadows, silently watching her. Lara would exit out of the chute she first entered instead of out of some other random exit way that completely undermined the effort she went through. Seriously, what's up with this? Anyway, Lara would remark during this cinematic that she'd better use one of the X-ray machines to check it does have the Sanglyph piece embedded, and we'd cut to the Louvre being infiltrated by Gunderson's mercenaries as in the current game, but minus the gas grenades for now.
You have your targets. Move out.
Level 5 would be Galleries Under Siege. To clarify, Hall of Seasons would still be there, just be headed under the level name and combined with Tomb of the Ancients. Galleries Under Siege would be combat or stealth based depending on player choice. Enemies would be Gunderson's mercenaries. Once back at the X-ray room, a cinematic would show Lara using it and confirming there is an artifact installed, and now the scene cuts to Gunderson and the others throwing gas grenades around the building. A mercenary would come into the X-ray room, but Lara would deal with them quickly and take their respirator. The gas would have faded by the time you reach the lower levels, so Lara would remove her respirator and you'd meet Curtis in the same way as the current game, except he would be less, let's say, handsy, and he would only take the painting, not your guns. Lara wouldn't shoot him because he had his Chiragai pointed at her. When he'd round the corner, gameplay would be returned to you as Curtis and you run together to the main hall, both fighting mercenaries along the way. Lara's unwillingness to kill Curtis during all of this is because he's seemingly, strangely, not on the mercenaries' side. Gunderson would be here in armor, serving as a mini-boss that you'd both attack until he dies. Still, no words have been spoken between Lara and Curtis. Once Gunderson is dead, Lara would chase Curtis into the next room and down the stairs in the cinematic as we know it. She'd eventually find him knocked out in an alley. When searching him, she'd determine the painting is missing, but find, briefly examine, and pocket his Periapt shard, not knowing what it is but still taking it. Lara would then be knocked out by a generic mercenary. When Lara is out cold, we'd see the mercenary shapeshift into quote-unquote Bouchard, or who we think is Bouchard, fade to black. Bouchard would wake her up. In the current game, this is where she pockets Curtis's shard, but it is extremely unobviously portrayed for some reason, so I wanted to make it clearer. The player isn't sure if this is Bouchard because of the shapeshift that just happened. Either way, he would take Lara to his car, saying that he was trawling police shortwave and figures she could use some help escaping. He'd tell her the police bands were full of details of another monstrum killing in Prague of men named Vasily and Krejci. Lara would hone in on the Vasily name and question it to confirm it is the art dealer mentioned in Werner's letter to her. She'd say she wants to go to Werner's apartment to check it out and generally see if there are any more leads there. The audience doesn't know this, but Bouchard is Corel because Corel can see her usefulness in obtaining the final painting, as backed up by Werner saying she'd be able to find the Louvre one, as she did just that. So Corel, and therefore the Cabal, now have painting number 2 looted from Curtis. Lara would go into Werner's apartment, and Carell, in the form of Bouchard, would be sure enough she'll find how to get the third and final painting. Unlike the current game, he would not be sending her to her death. There is no cleaner or assassin because there'd be no need. The real Bouchard no longer technically would appear in the game after the initial meeting because he was only ever hired to give Lara her gear, a role he had fulfilled. Level 6 would be Von Croy's apartment. As Lara would enter, just like the prologue, we'd have a slightly clearer, but not fully clear retelling of what originally happened. Lara would notice her classic backpack tucked away, as recovered from Egypt by Werner. In a moment of sentimentality, she'd transfer her belongings from the generic backpack to her original one. Your goal in this level would be to find 3 pieces of information. Regardless of what order you'd physically pick up each generic looking document, it would always be told in this order for the most efficient flow. The first document being information about the Cabal and how they were a powerful alliance of 5 alchemists and sorcerers in the 13 and 1400s. Peter van Eckart is the original black alchemist and said to have murdered and betrayed almost all of them in order to control their secrets. It says the Cabal and the Lux Veritatis battled constantly even after the disappearance of the black alchemist Eckart in 1445. But who were the Lux Veritatis? Lara still wonders. The second bit of information is about how the Lux Veritatis were a 12th century offshoot of the Knights Templar, of warrior monks dedicated to suppressing evil, particularly works of sorcery and alchemy, and were responsible for supposedly destroying the black alchemist Peter van Eckart in 1445. It reiterates that Brother Obscura was ordered to split the Sanglyph into 3 parts, embed them with religious imagery and scatter them around Europe. Lara herself would reflect, aha, but the Lux Veritatis didn't know that Brother Obscura created secret encrypted maps of their locations, which luckily Werner got his hands on one through Vasily. This would serve as a reminder for what the context is. The last detail is on the art dealer from Prague, Matthias Vasily. It would say he knows the location of Obscura painting number 3 after decrypting Obscura painting map number 3, but he wants more money for it. His business card would be right there, and Lara would say,
It's time I visited Prague.
Level 7 would be the Monstrum crime scene. Lara would be wearing the classic outfit with trousers underneath a long dark brown leather jacket as to hide her guns while in this public space. In the opening cinematic, Lara would arrive in a taxi, exit it and pay the driver. During this, a Czech news reporter would narrate that the Czech police have no new leads on the recent murders of a journalist for the paper Virginia Reflexa called Krejci, or for antiques dealer Vasily. Lara would look at the big building with police tape and guards all around it, and then over at a reporter, Ludik, taking pictures and writing notes. They'd talk and he'd prove useful throughout the conversation, and that he's a competent journalist for Virginia Reflexa and that he has in-depth information. They'd agree to exchange information so he can build a story and Lara can, well, get more information. Ludik would show Lara his dossiers on Eckart and Carell. We don't need information on Bouchard anymore, but here is a good place to get acquainted with Carell. Ludik would specify he's been consulting with a historian and his reporter colleagues to build the story, and that through his contacts, he has learned Eckart is protected by a group based in Prague called the Cabal, who are as insane and dangerous as he is. Lara would tell him what she learned at Werner's apartment about the Cabal. She'd ponder that Eckart must have built a new Cabal order and must have promised them something in return, but that it's likely he'll murder and betray this group as well, because he did exactly that to the original Cabal. Ludik would go on to tell Lara that his colleague, Krejci, informed him Eckart desecrates the bodies to take organs to revive something called the Sleeper, which neither of them know what the Sleeper is. Lastly, Ludik would say the Cabal built their stronghold here in Prague because it's above a Lux Veritatis vault, and so likely the location of the burial site of the third and final painting. Lara would educate him on who the Lux Veritatis are, the good guys who tried to suppress Eckart back in 1445. Ludik would say he knows all the information he relayed to her because one of his journalistic colleagues, Krejci, told him via voice message before he was found and killed by Eckart for getting too close, which is also why Ludik and his paper, Virginia Reflexa, are so personally hot on exposing this. Luddick would clarify that the police are not investigating the Cabal because they use their Mafia front as a means of getting the police to turn a blind eye, as the Mafia have the police bought out. Luddick would agree to get Lara an access code for the Cabal stronghold in exchange for later telling him what she finds. While he gets the access code, you'd search for a hammer handle and hammer head to be able to prise into the underground drains to enter Vasily's art gallery, bypassing the surrounding police. In his gallery, you'd do a puzzle to find the secret lower level office. There, you'd find 3 things. Firstly, information on the Periat shards, that they are 3 weapons of light. 3 crystalline shards, shaped like spearheads, created and kept by the Lux Veritatis to kill Nephilims. It says the Lux Veritatis used them to imprison Peter Van Eckart for centuries. Lara would hold the one she stole from Curtis, confirming they're the same as the sketches. It would go on to say one of them was entrusted to Konstantin Haysturm for a time, but after Eckart returned to Castle Kriegler and killed Konstantin, the shard was sent to his son, Curtis Haysturm, by inheritance. Secondly, information on the Sleeper. It is the last remains of the extinct Nephilim race kept in a stone cask found buried in Anatolia, Turkey. Thirdly, decrypted Obscura map number 3, showing the location of the Vault of Trophies beneath the Cabal's base of operations in Prague. When returning to Luddick, Lara would say she learned that the Sleeper is the last remains of the supposedly extinct Nephilim race, and that, combined with Eckart's organ harvesting and alchemic knowledge, he must be trying to rebreed the race, powered by the alchemic energy of the Sanglyph. Lara would also confirm Luddick's deceased contact Krejci was right about the Cabal stronghold being built above a Lux Veritatis vault, and that it's called the Vault of Trophies. Luddick and Lara would then drive to Level 8, the Cabal stronghold. Lara would ditch the trench coat here. The whole warehouse area would be so chock full of antiquities it would almost resemble a tomb or temple, and be an excuse for some of that classic layered level design. Soon enough, Lara would go straight down into the sanitarium. This would be Christina Boaz's territory, and you'd effectively be playing in what was Curtis's levels. So, a big change here that I internally debated a lot is that ultimately I would not have Curtis be a secondary playable character. This is because the dilemma is having gameplay so different that you're no longer playing the game you really purchased, or having gameplay so similar that it doesn't justify its inclusion, so I'd rather play it safe and just have the player stick with Lara. I do like Curtis though, so apologies to the Curtis Trent Estrogen Brigade. The majority of this level would have very horror based scenery. Lara would come across Vasily's desecrated corpse. He had become one of Boaz's experiments by this point. You'd find a map on a monitor of the stronghold showing the approximate location of the Vault of Trophies. Lara would comment that Eckart must have tortured the information out of Vasily. She'd lay the map from Vasily's office over the map of the stronghold and determine her route goes through a biodome and then through the maximum containment zone. She'd take the map and disable the power which is directly attached to the security system in order to clear a path to the Vault of Trophies. Lara wouldn't know this yet, but as a consequence of powering down the stronghold and leaving only generator power for, yes, arbitrarily, some lights and doors to work, a failed prototype Nephilim monster that was housed in the maximum containment zone is free to run amok, and because it's Nephilim, it can only be killed with a Periat shard. Level 9 would be the Bio-Research Facility. Lara would roll up her trousers into short shorts and now be essentially wearing her standard classic outfit. The aesthetic would be the same as the current game, but with a more Pallas Midas-like layout. Lots of killer plants, poison gas, burst pipes, mutants, Cabal guards, dangerous botanical experiments, and keycards to find. Near the end of the level, you'd come across the Cabal having a meeting. It is between Eckart, Boaz, and Muller. Boaz would inform Eckart of the prototype Nephilim's escape and that she directed her security team to capture it, but that, as he knows, she can't kill it without the Periat shard because it's half Nephilim. All Boaz can do is go off to help contain the proto, which she goes off to do. Eckart would ask if the power going off was Muller's incompetence, which he denies, saying the power is down everywhere, with only backup generators keeping what power they do have on. Carell would drag in Luddick, claiming he was found skulking around the loading bay, Eckart would warm a nearby wall so that the blood sign materializes when he tortures Ludwig to death with his glove. Lara would recognize and determine Eckart as von Croy's murderer from recognizing the blood sign on the wall as being the same as the one from Werner's apartment. You would continue the route to the Vault of Trophies, where you'd find a security room with a live feed of the maximum containment zone. It would show men in hazmat suits fighting the Proto and also fighting Curtis, who in turn is fighting the prototype Nephilim and the hazmat men. It's carnage. Lara, not being the type to wait patiently and knowing the Vault of Trophies is past the maximum containment zone anyway, heads onto it. By the time you'd actually reach the maximum containment chamber, Curtis is only up against the Proto and Boaz. Lara would help Curtis kill them both in a boss fight. You'd periodically use the shard to take them both out, and once done, Curtis, seeing Lara in possession of his Periapt shard, would finally get them talking. Lara and Curtis would suss each other out and eventually discover they're on the same side and agree to work together. During their conversation, Curtis would say all 3 shards are to be stabbed into Eckart to kill him permanently because the Lux Veritatis forged them for this purpose, and that Eckart has the second of the 3 shards stored somewhere in the stronghold, but he needs to find out where exactly. Lara would give Curtis the shard she stole from him, so now he has his one of 3. Curtis would explain that Eckart uses alchemically altered organs from his murder victims' bodies to help revive an ancient evil called the Sleeper. Lara deduced this already, but him relaying this information is a good reminder and builds trust between them. Lara would suggest he should go after the second shard, as he says he at least knows it's in the lower regions in Eckart's old alchemy lab, because the Lux Veritatis had always housed the second shard in their Prague base, which Eckart would surely have taken possession of, and that Lara will go to find the third painting in the Vault of Trophies to destroy it. We'd follow Lara to the Vault of Trophies level as they'd separate. Karel and Eckart would both have been watching and listening to this conversation from one of their security rooms. They'd both agree Lara will be useful in getting the painting, but they go and stop Curtis in his tracks from retrieving the second shard. Level 10 would be the Vault of Trophies. The beginning section of this level would be the core area of Aquatic Research Area from the current game. Gameplay would be more classic Tomb Raider territory, with the vault itself having traps, reanimated statues, challenge rooms, artifacts, you know the score. Architecture would be more Czech-based though. After taking painting number 3 and proceeding to the arena, we'd see Curtis captured by Eckart, Karel and Müller. Lara would throw Eckart the painting and Curtis would be dropped into the arena in exchange. Eckart would immediately tell Müller to unleash one of his little creations on them. Eckart and Karel would exit and Müller would jump onto the monster to direct it. Curtis would quickly tell Lara where Eckart's alchemy lab is and vault her up to the upper level to find it. Curtis would assure Lara he can take care of Müller and his beast on his own. The player can also assume he's perfectly capable of dealing with it, similar to how we assume Amanda can deal with the thralls in Underworld, as the camera stays on Lara. Level 11, the Alchemist Laboratory. There'd be more classic Tomb Raider type gameplay here. Once you'd get to the final room, the research room, Curtis would have caught up to you and flippantly confirm Müller and his abomination are dead. Periapt Shard number 2 is found here, guarded by creatures and monsters Lara would have taken out during the bulk of the level. The lab would be full of skulls from the Cabal's enemies. It would contain Eckart's glove prototypes, a picture of an empty stone casket with the word Nephilim painted on, alchemic experiments, a schematic of the final ritual chamber with its channels, water systems and details of chemicals and elements being used. It would have other things such as Eckart's journal with notes on meetings with the Nephilim, the betrayal of the 5 alchemists of the early Cabal in the 1400s, and some history on how Eckart created the Sanglyph and his glove. This kind of lore can be found at murtyscofield.com, a website I strongly recommend for Angel of Darkness enthusiasts. The bottom line is, the documents would show Eckart had long built another Cabal base in the remains of Castle Kriegler in Germany, and that he had engineered a ritual chamber to reawaken the Sleeper in. Historical Lux Veritatis documents would show one shard being kept in this Prague Lux Veritatis base, one being entrusted to Konstantin Heisturm, and one shard being in Castle Kriegler, so that's where the third and final shard must still be, right? Curtis would tell Lara his grandfather guarded Eckhardt in his cell until Castle Kriegler was bombed by an Allied aircraft which let Eckhardt go free, and that his grandfather used a secret tunnel to escape with the shard physically on him at that time, which was eventually passed down to Curtis. Curtis would say he changed his surname from Heisturm to Trent to escape these ancient feuds, but inheriting the shard is what provoked him to track down the Cabal. Curtis would also explain they need to go to the castle to use the trancing room to discover where exactly the last shard was left. Level 12 would be Castle Kriegler. You'd navigate the surrounding ruins of the castle with Curtis. I don't mind as a one-off change of pace having a level or two with an ally. There'd be bears, wolves, treacherous terrain and a river. You'd eventually find the secret escape tunnels to use to enter the castle and explore it to find the trancing room. When you do, Curtis, strictly non-romantically, would take Lara's hand so they both have a vision. The trance they would have would show them the final hours at Castle Kriegler in 1945, and we'd see the same story that Curtis told, but with the new insight that Eckhardt found and took the third bloody shard with him. So Eckhardt had been in possession of the third shard the entire time. They'd be physically disoriented as they'd come out of the trance and find Eckhardt standing over them triumphantly. He had stolen their two shards during the trance and now has everything he needs for the reawakening ritual. Eckhardt would walk away with the three shards now and would release a golem monster from a cage as a boss fight for them before taking the lift down into the underground lower realms. The monster would be armored, so you have to use some unexploded World War II bombs in the vicinity to kill it, and the last killing bomb would create a gaping hole conveniently down to the underground lower realms. Curtis would tie a rope and descend it first. Just as Lara would be about to descend it, Karel would appear out of nowhere and say her name to get her attention. He'd say he needs her to help stop Eckhardt because he suspects he is expendable because he killed Werner as soon as he no longer needed him and learned that he had betrayed the original Cabal members in the 1400s. Karel would say Eckhardt promised him immortality but fears for his own life. Of course, this is all a lie on Karel's behalf. He'd say the rest of the Cabal thought Eckhardt would give them immortality, but since they're dead anyway, Karel hasn't actually seen Eckhardt fulfill a promise and so doesn't want to risk helping Eckhardt reach his goal, which is to execute a ritual to transform himself into a more evolved being and rebreed the Nephilim race. To further gain Lara's trust and prevent Lara from killing him right there, Karel would advise Lara to stab Eckhardt in the chest with all three shards, which would reaffirm for Lara that since she knew that from Curtis, and since he knew about Eckhardt's 1400 betrayal, that Karel might actually be able to be trusted. Finally, Karel would advise her that Eckhardt managed to create devices that harness the power of the shards after studying the one he had for all those years, so its energy would be used to complete the reawakening ritual. So Lara must decouple the shards from the devices and kill Eckhardt with them. Lara would cautiously agree and then descend into Level 13, the lower realms. Lara would summarize to Curtis what happened upon descending to him. Curtis would agree that it makes sense. The level would be full of alchemy, high-tech and ancient lab gear, vats with human experiments, and would display Nephilim architecture. Eckhardt had been dismantling Nephilim temple innards and bringing them to his own subterranean fortress since 1945. Lara would find out the remaining history of the Nephilim by looking at the stone engravings and images all around her. They'd both learned the Lux Veritatis used the shards to kill the Nephilim race to the point of near extinction. The final boss battle, you'd platform around high up encircling walkways, pull levers to extend time bridges, dodge Eckhardt's attacks and shoot him from atop to stun him periodically in order to remove the three shards. Curtis would be fighting him up close on ground level, trying to slow him down so Lara can do all this. Once the first two shards would be disengaged, Lara would throw them down to Curtis each time to stab Eckhardt in the chest. Teamwork. When Lara would retrieve the third shard, the power of the whole structure would turn off, whereby at this point Eckhardt is breathless. Lara would come down with the last shard to deliver the killing stab. Karel would then come out of the shadows in Nephilim form, telling him the ritual will be finished regardless. Karel would explain that Eckhart was essentially working for him completely unknowingly, because Karel being a Nephilim meant that Eckhart was doing him and his race a service by trying to restore it. Lara would see his skin patterns and remember the full flashback of the night Werner died. In this flashback, we'd clearly see Eckhart morph to Karel and then manually draw the blood sign while looking at a photo of it from one of Eckhart's murders to frame Eckhart. Lara would correctly accuse him of being the one to kill Werner. Karel would explain he convinced and helped Lara to kill Eckhart because if she succeeded and he died, it would be a win for him, because by that point he genuinely didn't trust Eckhart and could complete the work on his own. But it would also have been a win for him if Lara died in the process to get her out the way. He'd say he had faith she'd be able to find the paintings when Werner said she'd be able to, and watched her movements from then on. Karel would shapeshift into Luddic and Bouchard to taunt her and say he can still easily restore the power to the mechanism and continue the ritual perfectly fine with her out the way. This would clearly suggest he now needs to kill her and Curtis himself. Lara would be standing near enough Eckhart's corpse where his glove is and pick it up. Curtis would look up at the sleeper, then to Lara, where they'd exchange a nod. Curtis would start a fight with Karel to give Lara the time to climb back to the top of the ritual structure again. Lara would grab the sleeper's ankle with the glove to destroy it to fully end the possibility of completing the ritual. Once Lara does this, the final cinematic would show the sleeper bursting into white energy. Enraged, Karel would pull a shard out of Eckhart's corpse and impale a distracted Curtis with it. Lara would descend from a free hanging wire in the direction of Karel. Mid-air, she would pull her ankles behind her so she can Moy Baran style land on Karel's back with her knees, crippling him. Lara would move to help a dying Curtis to safety, but he knows he wouldn't be able to make it. Not wanting Lara to slow down and place her in danger, he'd use his Chirugai to stop Lara coming over and non-verbally motion her to just get the hell out quickly. Lara would hesitantly, but not that hesitantly, nod in agreement and run for the exit where everything explodes behind her. Cut to Lara returning to the ritual chamber to find Curtis's Chirugai in a large patch of blood. She'd pick the Chirugai up and it instantly juts out its blades. Lara herself is able to make it retract its blades, then extend them out, and then retract the blades once more, signifying the Chirugai is now in her control. This is where she'd walk away. The Angel of Darkness chapter would ideally be entirely closed here. Curtis's fate would basically be down to the player's interpretation, because ultimately it wouldn't matter in the slightest either way, since ideally each new game would fully be new characters and new stories. Okay, that is that. There is a hell of a lot more detail I could have gone into regarding level design, mechanics, and opportunities to learn more backstory that would include more material from MurtySchofield.com, but I really just wanted to present only the basic foundation of this restructure. Tell me though, did I disrespect the integrity of the Angel of Darkness story with these changes, or were they quite logical and made sense to do? Or did I create even more plot holes? But regardless, let me know what tweaks, big or small, you'd have made in a hypothetical remake. My name is Seth Mackenzie, thank you so much for watching.